Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So grateful you've joined us. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org and all the social media platforms. At goodlifetelevision.org, you can see all the full-form interviews as well as what we call power clips, which are some of the great moments from those interviews. And we are so grateful for so many of you who have joined us at goodlifetelevision.org from, I think, 97 countries now, all 50 states. And so wherever you are, welcome. And we're so grateful that you're with us. This program is brought to you by the Turner Foundation here in Santa Barbara, California. So if you want to learn more about the Turner Foundation, you can always go to theturnerfoundation.com and you can learn a little bit more about what they all do. I'm really excited about my guest today, very interesting guest. Aaron Schwartzbart is with me. Aaron, welcome.
How you doing? Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
I don't know if I've ever met a real-life rocket scientist, but here we are.
Yes, sir.
I'm used to saying, this isn't rocket science,
right?
But in your case, it was.
It is.
It was and is,
yeah.
Aaron had a long career as a rocket scientist, 28 years before leaving that work to devote himself to full-time ministry. He is the president and pastor of a organization called Motor Gospel Ministries, which we're going to talk all about in a minute. But start by just kind of telling us a little about your background and upbringing and kind of how you became a rocket scientist and what a rocket scientist does.
Right.
I don't even know.
Okay. So that's 3 or 4 things. I came out of the womb hardwired to be criminally insane every time I got a steering wheel in my hand. As far back as I can remember, I was like a homicidal maniac with the steering wheel. Long before I was old enough to drive legally, that was in there. And I had an amazing gift for math and science. Living proof that however the brain works, I don't know, people are much less predictable than machines are. So with all due respect to the behavioral sciences, the conclusions that they draw, in my opinion, must be held much more tentatively than the conclusions that we draw dealing with a race car or a rocket engine or something like that, because people are so unpredictable. So given that unpredictability, I don't have a clue how the brain works, the squishy brain, but somehow side by side, a level of virtually homicidal insanity with the steering wheel in my hand existed side by side with brilliance for math and science, however that works. And my parents pushed me to excel at the math and science for which I was gifted all my life. Despite my strongest desire to either be a race car driver or a rock star, I was not interested in math and science. Sometimes we're very good at things that we're not passionate about. Sometimes we're very passionate about things that we aren't good at. In choosing police officers, you don't want the most trigger-happy person, no matter how passionate they are about shooting people. That's probably not the right person to be holding the gun and using it in a mature fashion, right? So I was really good at math and science. I really wanted to be a race car driver or a rock star. And but thankfully, they pushed me toward math and science for years, despite my not being crazy about it. I got my the first time I got less than an A on math was algebra in 8th grade. I was accustomed to math coming easily without any effort whatsoever, and algebra was a struggle. And my dad, instead of being sympathetic, he gave me 20 extra algebra problems per night on top of the regular algebra homework. He said, obviously you're not practicing this vigorously enough if you're not getting A's. I hated my dad for it. I hated algebra, and 35 years later, after a charmed career as a rocket scientist that has facilitated so much of my ministry, I thank my dad for it.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm a Jew by blood. I was not a Christian growing up. I was more of an atheist by faith, even though a traditional American Jew by blood. And I got born again in a very unexpected way at about 30 years old.
Tell me that story.
The short version, I mean, it could take a lot of hours, but short version, picture, if you will, gainfully employed, tax-paying rocket scientist. My daily commute was on Canoga Avenue, 35-mile-an-hour rush hour traffic, Canoga Avenue, 90 miles an hour in and out of 35-mile-an-hour rush hour traffic, 5 days a week, every morning, every night. That wasn't even street racing. That was just, I was the road warrior or the Terminator or something, and that was
how you drove.
My persona. Yes, correct. I would slow down to 60 miles an hour for the intersections if I was turning left. I would blow through them at 90 if I wasn't turning, and I'd be right back up to 90 after turning at 60. And somehow, miraculously, I didn't kill myself or anybody else or go to jail. So that's who I was, and I was proud of it. I had no shame of it. I reveled in that persona. That's who I was. And in the midst of that, as a Jewish atheist, arrogant rocket scientist, homicidal maniac with the steering wheel, a Charles Manson or a Ted Bundy with the steering wheel, Christians asked if they could pray for me. And I said, sure, knock yourself out. Real atheists are not offended by Christians. People who have a terribly strong desire to be atheist, they're mad at this God in whom they claim to not believe. People who have a strong desire to be an atheist, they wish they were atheists, they're real mad at Christians who have a faith of which they're jealous, right? But genuine atheists, they don't care about God any more than they care about Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. To the extent that I was an atheist, I had no problem with Christians or their fairy tale God or anybody else's fairy tale God. So I said, sure, knock yourselves out. You know, it's really sweet of y'all to want to pray for me. This isn't going to make me a Christian or anything like that. And they went, oh, they said, it's not up to us to make you a Christian. That's a work of God if it's going to happen for you. And if it happens for you, it will be unmistakable. And they laid their hands on me and prayed for me as an atheist, standing stone cold sober as a judge, not looking for an experience, not being subject to power of suggestion or anything like that. They prayed for about 10 minutes, and for about a minute and a half out of the 10, electricity played up and down my back. I'm not talking about sentiment or emotion. I mean the kind of thing that an atheist would understand, you know, would take note of. And I asked them afterward, did you touch my back? I knew they didn't touch my back, but I had no explanation for the physical manifestation of electricity. And they said, no, why do you ask? And I said, well, I felt something like electricity going up and down my back. And they said, that's the Holy Spirit. That's a common occurrence. They weren't even fazed by it. And I don't know which was more attention getting to me as an arrogant atheist scientist, the experience of electricity, or the fact that they weren't jumping up and down shouting hallelujah like this was par for the course for them. I stopped being an atheist literally that night, but I did not become a Christian that night. I was highly skeptical, you know, highly analytical, lots of questions, not one to park my brain at the door and join a club. A couple of years of similar experiences to that electricity experience, and I surrendered my life to Christ, and I've been serving Him as best I can for, well, this is going on 30 years ago now. I'm pushing 60 now. That was around the age of 30 that happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he knew a really smart guy like you probably needed the electricity in the back.
Apparently.
Like, maybe.
Right, apparently.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Right.
And what has been the before and after story for you?
Well,
I'm assuming you don't drive 90 and 35.
Correct. I go way faster now than I ever did then, and only at racetracks throughout the Western United States. You know, now I'm doing 158 in the John 316 car. I have 4 championships in the John 316 race car, Motor Gospel Ministries race car. On my budget, I'm doing 158 coming into turn 1 at Fontana. I'm running over top of cars that are doing 125. We're getting passed by a privileged few that can afford to go in excess of 200 miles an hour. And in this bumper-to-bumper pack of 50 cars ranging from 125 to 200 miles an hour, we're all slamming into the same turn together. That's what I do now. Back then, it was 90 miles an hour and 35 mile an hour rush hour traffic, being a danger to everybody. Often driving drunk. I had no qualms. I was actually meaner when I was sober than I was drunk. Some people, they're a mean drunk. I was a criminally insane sober, and I was a really soft, sweet-spirited drunk, and I would drive drunk. Less dangerously probably than when I was sober, driving criminally, you know, homicidally. I was a producer and a consumer of sordid pornography, dark pornography, not nice vanilla Bob Guccione, Hugh Hefner. I mean stuff that would have gotten Charles Manson off. Some of my most poignant creative energy. It's a fascinating thing, fascinating theological point for people to ponder that are watching this. Not everything that is skillfully executed and captivating and beautiful, whether it's in music or paintbrush or cinematography or whatever, not all of that is pleasing to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yes.
I was living proof of that. I was critically acclaimed. I was amateur, but critically acclaimed. I'm convinced that I could have seduced 80% of the population into lusting after whatever I wanted them to lust after with the camera. Seduction is $189 billion a year business on Madison Avenue, right? Seduction convinces people that they can't live without a $70,000 car or something like that, which is objectively untrue. So yeah, I was really into seduction. All that stuff changed virtually overnight. I know pastors that still struggle with pornography, and I have sympathy for them. I don't know why sometimes God delivers people in the blink of an eye, and sometimes God uses a 12-step program, and sometimes God leaves us to struggle for the rest of our lives, and He doesn't owe us any explanations on why.
Jacob's ladder.
Right?
Yeah.
So He doesn't owe us any explanation.
Yeah.
But in my case, after being a producer, and I reveled in it. I had no shame about it. A self-glorifying producer of sordid pornography. I lost the appetite for pornography virtually overnight. When I got born again about 30 years ago, not even looking for a change. People say you have to want to change to change. No, some people weren't looking. Saul wasn't looking for a change when he was riding on it, right? I was happy with pornography. I was happy the way I was. I wasn't looking to become a Christian. That changed virtually overnight. I haven't stumbled with it not once in 30 years. I haven't been tempted not once in 30 years. And I'm not bragging about that. I'm not giving myself the credit. I know plenty of very mature pastors that still wrestle with it. Yeah. In my case, I still wrestle with road rage when I'm provoked, but for whatever reason, the porn thing, he dealt with that virtually overnight 30 years ago.
Unbelievable.
It is. It's incredible. And I don't know why he chose to deal with that one in the blink of an eye, whereas the road rage, he wants me to sort of be mature and
right.
and vigilant regarding my own heart, my own attitude when provoked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you must feel a lot freer than, you didn't even know you weren't free probably.
Right.
But now you're free.
Oh.
Does that feel good?
Yes, it feels good.
Yeah. What does a rocket scientist do?
It depends on, the answer to that question depends on the context, of course. In my case, I joke about this a little bit. I've devoted 35 years of my life, and now a footnote to what you have is, since we talked, I got a phone call and some friends asked me to go help them go back to the moon. So I told them I wasn't willing to give up the ministry, but I'm a part-time consultant back in the space program now. Now young guys with immense responsibility for really ambitious stuff are paying me really well to give my opinion. They have all the responsibility, and I just sit around giving my opinion that I've built up over 28 years at Rocketdyne. It's a chapter of my...
Okay, so you're consulting for the space program?
Yes, yeah, for
people who are
Blue
going
Origin.
back to the moon?
Yeah, correct.
Just on the side?
Yes, correct.
Okay, let's go back to...
Right.
This is a whole different league here we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so
people on these Grateful Dead pages, I'm a musician and I'm really into the Grateful Dead, even though I'm a pastor. I don't approve of everything the Grateful Dead stood for, but I still love the music. Going back to when I was 18 and I was a Deadhead and I was in the Allman Brothers and all that, people on these Grateful Dead pages occasionally want to talk about stuff besides Jerry Garcia. And they say, so what does everybody do here for a living? And I'm like, I drive really fast, I rock really hard, and occasionally some rocket science on the side. It's like the weirdest answer, and yet it's true. It's true, right. So in my case, I joke about this. I've devoted 35 years of my life to playing with little coils of wire and little magnets. It's a child science project. You do this in junior high, make a little electromagnet, you do this, that, and the other. I've devoted 35 years of my life to elevating that to a very high level of understanding as it applies to liquid rocket engine turbomachinery. So a liquid rocket engine is an upside down funnel, and in the case into which you pump propellants and you light it at the bottom, fire comes out the bottom, and it pushes things up. It's really as simple as that. There's much more to it, obviously, but at the executive summary level, it's just an upside down funnel that pushes things up because fire is coming out the bottom. In the case of turbomachinery fed liquid rocket engine, you have pumps that are spinning that are feeding those propellants in there, as opposed to like a bottle of gas. Like if you just cranked open a bottle of gas, you wouldn't have any turbomachinery. Well, my area of specialty is the subset of liquid rocket engines that use pumps to pump the propellants in there. Those pumps could be plus 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit at one end, minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit at the other end, spinning 48,000 RPM with vibration that's tantamount to like a paint shaker or jackhammer or something. And you have 300 little widgets on that pump taking an EKG, measuring everything about that pump, the blood pressure of the pump, all this stuff. Those widgets have to survive these thermal extremes, this vibration, all that stuff, these very high speeds. And if they're not right, 100% of the time, you might kill 7 astronauts on the evening news. So my 35 years of playing with little magnets and coils of wire have been in the context of making a better EKG for those pumps. And the magnet and the coil of wire is like the little patch that goes on your chest for the EKG. I'm the world's expert.
Those are on
the patch that would go on your chest for an EKG, that little thing.
Yeah.
That's a little assembly with a magnet and a coil of wire going inside the pump to do the EKG on the pump. And I've over the course of 35 years that I didn't plan on. When I came out of college in 1985, UCLA, degree in physics, I had no idea what I wanted to do, except I knew I wanted to be a race car driver or a rock star. But I had no idea what I wanted to do in physics in 1985. And over 35 years, I've become the world's expert at making the little thing that takes the EKG on these liquid rocket engine pumps.
What happened to the Challenger?
Oh man, is that an interesting and big question. So we do. Go ahead.
As quickly as you can.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, how long do you have?
Some pretty complex
Right. So we do something called root cause analysis, where we say we define the event, and let's say the event is the astronauts died. Why did the astronauts die? Blunt force trauma. Why did the astronauts experience blunt force trauma? Well, they fell in the ocean. Why did they fall in the ocean? The Challenger lost thrust, so on and so forth. So we could spend 8 hours on that chain, and that chain can have capillaries. Sometimes it's a single stream, but sometimes you get two things like this. Like, why didn't they design the O-rings to handle snow in Florida? And why did some decision maker decide to launch that day, that cold day, even though the people who designed the O-rings told them it's questionable at best whether these, now you start to get into multiple answers to that question. But the short version, the astronauts died, the O-rings shrank, and allowed propellant flame to come out where it wasn't supposed to come out. You take a stick of dynamite, you wrap aluminum foil around it, you put an ant on top of it, you light it, and you hope that the aluminum foil contains all the fire so that it only comes out the bottom, gently lifting the ant up. But if you get a leak in that aluminum foil, the dynamite goes boom like this instead of all coming out the bottom. That's the short version.
Wow.
Fascinating 6 or 8 hour long dialogue we could have about all of those capillaries. But
someday we'll do that.
Good.
So the attention to detail is just insane.
Oh, right. Yes, correct. Insane is the word. People cannot imagine. The youngsters coming out of school, they only know Wikipedia and Google and stuff, and they don't want to be bored. They have a TikTok attention span, and they want to be in charge of the moonshot because it sounds so interesting and adventurous. People with dreamers like that kill astronauts. The people we lost 13 astronauts and 1 civilian school teacher on my watch, despite an insane level of attention to detail.
That's incredible.
And people can't imagine the tedious nature of that attention to detail that keeps the fire coming down the right end.
Right. So in addition to your brain working like this,
yes,
you're a pastor.
Yes, sir.
You have pastoral gifting.
Yes.
Talk about motorsport or motor gospel ministries and what your goal is.
Okay, it's largely divided into three activities. We have very flagrantly Christian activities. Church ministry, Saturday morning Sabbath services, Friday night evangelism. I stand out on Friday nights with the keytar in my hand. I do a very unusual thing. Everybody knows keytar is this bubblegum toy from 80s music. I do B.B. King on the keytar. I play weeping, moaning, wailing blues on a keytar like Eric Clapton and B.B. King and such. I shred like Eddie Van Halen, and I do Guns N' Roses like Slash and stuff. All sanitized versions of the songs, so we're not featuring any lyrics that are displeasing to the Lord. And it's cranked up to 11, and everybody at Granada Hills Food Truck Fridays knows the guy who shreds like Van Halen and Slash on the keytar in the name of Jesus with the huge motor gospel banner and the Bibles and the tracts and stuff on the table. So that's flagrantly Christian activity. That's evangelism Friday nights. Saturday morning Sabbath service, very somber, quiet, acoustic piano stuff, very reverent. I want Saturday to be a time of rest. 6 days a week is wide open throttle with shredding the keytar and driving 158 miles an hour in bumper-to-bumper traffic. Sabbath is a time of rest. It's not a time for entertainment. So very quiet, contemplative, acoustic piano. I sing in Hebrew, I sing in English, I sing in Spanish. Sometimes it's just silent, reverent, quiet, silent prayer and stuff like that. And then really intense biblical teaching of the type that is commensurate with the Talbot education, as you might imagine. But separate from that is what I like to call kindness for kindness' sake, non-religious benevolence in the community. I'm convinced that Jesus fed 5,000 with a few loaves and fishes, not as a seduction, not as a Madison Avenue technique to get them to come to an evangelistic crusade, but because the Bible says he had compassion on them. They were hungry. And you don't get the sense that he only fed them if they were good targets for his evangelistic efforts. You got the sense that it was sincere compassion. So a big element of Motor Gospel Ministries is kindness for kindness' sake, just simple compassion. And the most notable activity there is my life-saving anti-street racing campaign that I operate for the Los Angeles Police Department in cooperation with local government and California Highway Patrol, other law enforcement agencies, and piggybacking on much bigger organizations than ours, like the National Auto Sport Association. They have the infrastructure to rent Auto Club Speedway for a weekend and give us a place to play at 200 miles an hour with the $2 million death dismemberment policy and the Jaws of Life and the EMTs and all the infrastructure. So as the president and pastor of Motor Gospel Ministries anti-street racing campaign, we get young people sentenced by the courts to come to the track where we embarrass them in bumper-to-bumper traffic at 150 to 200 miles an hour. They thought they knew how to drive for about they come swaggering in and they go out, you know, with a much more sober. Street racing loses a lot of its luster when you're out there at 150 miles an hour and you're the slow guy. And,
right.
Yeah, you thought you were Vin Diesel because you had the haircut, but then you find out Vin Diesel is an actor. I'm a driver, I'm not an actor. Vin Diesel is an actor.
I want to give one example. Angel Rodriguez is a client. So Angel was arrested for street racing, sentenced to community service with Motor Gospel Ministries. As part of his service, he competed legally against off-duty Sergeant Jesse Garcia in Motor Gospel's inaugural Beat the Heat drag race at Irwindale Drag Strip. His community service was completed long ago, but Angel has stayed with Motor Gospel and is showing promises. So this is the type of kid who was doing this illegal street racing.
Yes.
You guys grab them,
Yep.
or they have to come because of a judge tells them to.
Right.
And you're seeing transformation in their lives.
Yes.
Talk about that.
It's meaningful transformation. It's not the kind of transformation that comes from bringing kids and making them sit in traffic school and making them sign an insincere pledge to never speed again. It's the kind of transformation that comes when you think there's no nice Christianese word for BA, you know, bad something, but you think you're bad something, you climb in that octagon and Tito Ortiz chokes you out in about 10 seconds, that's life-changing. Your attitude, any rethinking you might do of being bad something and beating people up in the streets, that's not an insincere pledge that you're signing from 8 hours in traffic school. You just got choked out by Tito Ortiz in 15 seconds. You realize real fast, you get a much clearer perspective on things.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. So our transformation is we have like almost no recidivism. When they get a taste of the track, they either decide they're not cut out for racing and they straighten up their act on the street, or they decide they really like this, they buy a race car, and in either way we've saved a life potentially.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the LAPD works with you in this?
Yes, sir.
How did that happen?
Well, it's interesting. Let's see, where do we begin? The literal answer to that, the historical answer to that, with many details for which we don't have time, is I left the space program in 2012 to devote full-time to the ministry. I now had 50 hours a week to spend instead of 10 hours a week to devote to my passion. You know, I founded Motor Gospel in 2001. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary. I founded it in 2001, but I was an amateur until 2012. I didn't leave the day job till 2012. So that was 10 years of it being my passion and spending 10 hours a week on it. Now, 2012, I had 50 hours a week to spend on this passion and this calling. And I saw an advertisement for an open house that they were having at LAPD Mission Community Police Station, and I called them up randomly and said, hey, you want a John 3:16 race car there with a driver signing autographs, giving out anti-street racing literature? And they said, cool, come on. And we got to know each other. Their captain, then Captain Todd Chamberlain, he retired a commander, he's retired now, but Todd Chamberlain took me under his wing. So in addition to, you know, manager, leader, gunslinger, detective, marital counselor, everything else that a police captain has to do, he was also career counselor for a semi-retired rocket scientist do-gooder, helping me understand not biting off more than I could chew. You know, how ambitious should I be in the community? And under his tutelage, Motor Gospel has just mushroomed since then in a good way.
How do people find you? Like, where are you? Like,
mostly on Facebook. We have a website, motorgospel.org.
Okay.
I have Instagram, Aaron Schwartzbart. I have Twitter, Aaron Schwartzbart. We have 3 Facebooks, Aaron Schwartzbart, Motor Gospel Ministries, and Motor Gospel Youth Center. But right, wrong, or indifferent, my Aaron Schwartzbart Facebook page has 3,600 plus followers. The others all have a few hundred followers. So my most vigorous activity is my Aaron Schwartzbart Facebook and my IMDb page. We have working with my partner Neil Newman, a longtime cinematographer partner, 15 years. We've cranked out about 20 anti-street racing documentary shorts in cooperation with the PD and the government, and that's all over IMDb.
And where are you located when you're doing your Friday
Oh,
nights?
yeah. Granada Hills Grub Fest. Mary Turner operates arguably the biggest food truck festival in the world. She gets 26 food trucks on a warm summer night, where most food truck festivals might have 6 or 8 trucks. She has like 26 trucks. Right near the Motor Gospel Youth Center, 17735 Chatsworth Street, Granada Hills, California 91344. Corner of Yarmouth and Chatsworth, right next to Jack in the Box, in an LA Alignment parking lot.
There you are.
Yes, sir.
And where's the Sabbath service?
At the Motor Gospel Center, same at 17735 Chatsworth Street, Granada Hills 91344.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then so people can join you.
Yes, sir.
And find you there.
Yes, sir.
You're amazing. I could talk to you for a long time.
Huh?
I really could talk to you for a long time. I don't say that to very many people.
Wow,
I can talk to you for a long time.
Thank you.
What a guy, Aaron Schwartzbart. He is a pastor, a president, an evangelist, it sounds like, a musician, a rocket scientist. We could go on. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you next time. What is Good Life TV, you may ask? Well, let me tell you. Good Life TV exists to inspire, empower, educate, and encourage. Those are the things we want to do in a rough year that we're having. We want to encourage you. We want to inspire you. We're telling stories. They're real life stories. They're not all celebrities. They're people from all walks of life. And I think you're really going to be encouraged. There's a bunch of them at goodlifetelevision.org. So go there today. goodlifetelevision.org. Get encouraged. We love you. God bless you. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you've joined us. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org, all the social media platforms. It's so great to be here. It's so great that you're here with us. The goal here is to inspire, to encourage, to honor, to educate, and to empower. And we do that by telling great stories and meeting great people and introducing you to great people. And we have one of them here with us today. Maria Hernandez is with me. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Maria is the founder of the Vida Center here in Santa Barbara, California, and we're going to get into that part and the work that she's doing in a minute. But I wanted to kind of start. You have a powerful story. We were talking about this a minute ago, in what you and your husband Oscar have done, and then your vision and what you want to do is compelling and exciting. But start with kind of your upbringing. I know you were born and raised here, but talk about kind of your upbringing, your hardworking immigrant parents. Yeah. I know had a big impact on you, but talk a little bit about your upbringing.
My upbringing was pretty interesting. I was very fortunate because I was born and raised in Santa Barbara. So Santa Barbara has had a complete and utter, unique impact on my life and what happened. So halfway up to my childhood, I would say we were pretty middle class, even though I had immigrant parents. And I say immigrant because I don't know if that even qualifies. My dad came over on the Bracero program. I don't know if you remember that. In the 50s and 60s, workers were asked to come.
Yeah, right.
We didn't have to, illegally cross the border.
Right.
So fortunately, he was one of those people, and his employer sponsored him to get citizenship eventually. Oh. And then we ended up, and so somehow my parents ended up settling here in Santa Barbara, and that was...
Good choice.
Yeah. It has made all the difference in my life.
Wow.
So my parents ended up separating and divorcing when I was about 12. And we went from being lower middle class probably to being on social services with my mom.
Wow.
And so I always say I'm a product of nonprofit services and social services. And that really had an impact on the decision to become a social worker, a professional social worker.
Right.
And that's what I did at 17. I decided I was going to be a professional social worker. And I also decided at 17, I'm one of 9 children.
Wow.
Yeah. So I also decided that I wasn't going to become a parent until I could give a child what they deserved, which was everything I felt I had lacked in my own childhood, you know. Time, nurturance, love, attention. And I met my husband very sort of like coincidentally, and we were dating for 3 years. And as we started getting serious, I was going to move to LA to finish school out there, and I told him, I said, you know, if this becomes a little more serious, I just want you to know that whoever I marry has to be okay with the fact that I may never have a child, or if I do, I also want to adopt. Because I wasn't sure that I wanted to bring more children. My mom had done her part with 9 kids. Yeah, she had the numbers. So and then I had, Santa Barbara has been so unique. And it's interesting because in high school, the idea of adopting, that's where it came in. And I had a girlfriend, Suzanne. She's so amazing. She was probably a vegan before it was even coined, at least, you know, popular language and culture. She rode her bike everywhere, and we talked about adopting in high school.
Really?
And not contributing to the world overpopulation of the world. And so it was interesting. I had a very unique upbringing here in Santa Barbara. I was a soccer player, so I really got to enjoy my high school time. I'm a Don.
You're a Don.
Go Dons. You know, it's interesting because I remember also growing up in Santa Barbara was very unique in that when my dad was still with us, he was a gardener. Probably would have been called the landscaper nowadays, but he was a gardener in the Montecito estates. And so I would work with him on the weekends.
Oh, really?
And I got to see the wealth that existed in this world. Literally, I mean, estates that you had to get on the little carts to go to, like, the, you know, guest house, like a mile away. It was amazing. So all of that sort of like percolated in my mind. I didn't realize it at the time. I wanted to give back. I knew that because as having received what I received as a young adolescent through my mom when she was, you know, struggling to raise the last of her 4 kids, and then also that idea of wealth and business always sort of, because my dad had his own business, his gardening business. So it just kind of created this very unique, I think now I look back on it, I can, in retrospect, in hindsight, I could see how it all kind of came together. But I've always been interested in building a business and wealth and serving humanity.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of where I'm at.
And you did obtain your master's degree in social work from UCLA in 1997. And became a licensed clinical social worker in 2009. So this is something you always knew you wanted to do. I mean, that was clear, which is rare for somebody that young to have that. But it's because of what happened to you, right?
It's because of what happened and some, you know, synchronicity, I guess, or coincidence. I had good grades in high school, but, you know, I was, even though my brother had gone to college, college wasn't spoken about. And so, and I hung out with all the, you know, a lot of Montecito kids, and they all went off to college. And I don't remember even like applying to college. Yeah, it was really interesting. And coincidentally or synchronistically, my brother, who lives in Dallas, we were just talking about Dallas, he was already over at Carleton College in Minnesota. He was pre-med. And he came home one summer, and I had just graduated from the high school, and he's like, what are you going to do? What are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. Well, like, what are you doing with your life? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, you got to go to school. You're going to be a doctor. You should be a doctor like me. And just sign up for City College and be a pre-med student. That's all you got to tell him. You're a pre-med. Okay, so I was a pre-med student for my first semester at City College. Wow. And then I like sharing this story because it's funny how things work out. But I went into the Career Center one day, just synchronistically, randomly, and they did an assessment on like what your career interest might be, and I answered all the questions, and it actually said that I would social services, human services, I think was the field, the helping profession was what I was geared towards because of my answers. And I saw a video on social workers, the whole gamut of social workers, you know, schools, children and families, counselors, they're everything. And they all said the same thing: you have to get your master's in social work to make a living in this field. And so I was like, that's it, I know what I want to do. And I remember my brother checked in with me a few months later, maybe the second semester I was at City College, and he was so disappointed that I was going to be a social worker and not a doctor. He said, don't do it, don't do it. Whatever you do, don't do it. You can help people by being a doctor. You're going to be 40, you have gray hair, addicted to coffee and cigarettes, and burnt out. You don't want to be a social worker. You can help people by being a doctor. And I was like, no, this is what I want to do. Wow. And so I ended up going into social work.
Isn't that amazing how, you know, your experience, because of the situation you were in after the divorce and kind of having a more challenging environment where you relied on those nonprofits, those services, that had a major imprint, you know, in what you want to do, which is incredible.
Yeah.
And good.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's not great that you were in that position, but look what it's led to.
Yeah. I don't regret even going into social work. It's been a challenge, especially when you have that. Like for me, I mentioned I have that wanting to build a business, and social entrepreneurship is like one of my big passions. And so it's always like barely, you know, sort of surviving with the social work salary and degree.
Right.
But to this day, I wouldn't change it for the world. Would not change it for the world.
Let's talk a little bit about the work you're doing in the Vida Center that you founded. You're launching. It's difficult during the pandemic to launch anything or do much, but you've continued on. But I want to get into a little bit of your story, because I think this is so perfect for today. The environments that we're in, it just seems like this is more needed than ever before. But maybe we could back up one step. And before we came on, we were talking about Greg Boyle. Mm-hmm. So Greg Boyle, for those of you who don't know, is the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. They do unbelievable work, and he's become a national hero in many respects in this regard. He came on Good Life, and you saw that episode, but you were talking about him. What is it about him and them that inspires you?
I think it goes back to, growing up at 12. I mean, my parents were separated. Here my dad had owned homes in Santa Barbara, and then next thing we know, we're on public housing, because he sold his home and went and bought some property in Mexico and pretty much, abandoned his family. Yeah. So I decided, like I said, to go into the social work profession because I really wanted to help and give back, because I realized that I would not have gotten to where I had gotten without the help of nonprofits and social services. And I went into my master's in social work thinking that social workers were like social advocates, and we are. But the program that I got into at the time, and I think it was just, it didn't matter which program I went. I got my master's at UCLA, but if I had gone to USC, it would have been the same thing, or any other program. But there was really a focus to training social workers to be clinical social workers, to go into more like the counseling and therapy, if you chose a micro path, meaning one-on-one.
Right.
There was this, and I was really disappointed. I was this close to actually leaving.
Really?
Yeah, because I thought, and I remember one of my advisors said, just finish your degree and then you can do whatever you want with it. So I had been really impressed when I was 12 or 13 by a rec program actually run by the city over on the west side, where we lived really temporarily for a couple years. And they took us out backpacking and camping, and we danced. It was kind of like probably the program that you guys have
right.
at at the village. And so that just, like you said, it imprinted my mind with something that I wanted to do for kids in the future. Mm-hmm. So I went to graduate school, and my second year at graduate school, UCLA, we went to a conference for social workers, I believe. It was like a national conference or something, and Father Gregory Boyle was there, and he was the keynote speaker.
Okay.
And he mentioned Homeboy Industries and what he had done, and I said, this is why I got my degree, because I want to build something just like that.
Wow.
And one of the things that struck me the most about his program, which is what I believe is really important and I want to incorporate into Be the Center, is giving young kids like some, I call it personal sustainability, a way to make money, a way to just earn money. Because when I was, my work with my parents, my mom was a housekeeper at the hotels on, West Beach, East Beach. And she would take us on the weekends, and then my dad, would take us gardening on the weekends. And they paid us. They gave us money. And I was 12, and I was like, this is cool. And then I actually got my first job at 14 at Sam's To Go on Milpa Street.
Oh, really?
I was 14, and I was earning about $200 and something.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good money.
And so I remember, I could keep up with my friends that, parents gave them cars or paid for stuff. And I just remember always being, having this feeling that money is freedom. And not just freedom, but there's a sense of, fulfillment in earning your own money. Dignity.
Yeah.
And to have fun, because that's a lot of times teens, there's just so many stressors right now.
Yeah.
So many stressors. And how are we helping them to actually have fun too? Right? So that's why it was so and Homeboy Industries, I think, was based on that model of giving jobs.
They've got that thing wired down there. But yeah, you're right. It's not just because the way you're describing having fun is I work, I get that check, and I can have a little bit of fun, and I can feel good about myself, versus purposelessness, wandering. There's a big difference. And you would think, oh, no responsibilities, that's fun.
No.
Maybe for a week.
Yeah, exactly. For a little while.
Not long term.
Yeah, exactly.
You and Oscar made an interesting decision. In addition to having your own birth child, Eric, you adopted a sibling group. And I think it was about 2006 or so when you started to pursue this. Why did you decide to do that?
Again, going back to the upbringing here in Santa Barbara, and one of my best friends in high school talking about we were going to adopt someday. It's ironic. She ended up having 3 of her own children.
Oh, she did?
Yeah, she did. She didn't adopt.
Well, you took 3.
I took 3.
So, yeah,
we were actually only going to adopt 1, and then we said maybe 2. And honestly, looking back at it, 3 was not in our. It was not in our conscious decision to adopt 3, but that's how it turned out. But we had talked about adopting before we got married. We were dating, and my husband said, yeah, he's like, my husband was born and raised in Mexico. He did immigrate, so his family did immigrate many years ago, but I met him when he was about 22 maybe. And I was 19, and we started dating for 3 years, and then we kind of knew it was going to get serious. I moved to LA to finish school, and I just said, hey, if this becomes a long-term thing, we get married, I want to adopt. And he's like, you know what, that idea, I don't know why, but it's always struck a chord with me.
Really?
His grandpa used to take in young men in Mexico. He was born and raised in Mexico City. And his grandpa used to take in these, he's like, I don't even know who they were. They were just these young boys or young kids. And he's like, and then his grandparents. But his grandpa was the softie, the one with the heart. The grandma would be like, no, we can't feed anybody else. Oh, they need, a place to stay. So he always had that idea of helping. And so we made that conscious decision, and then we knew we weren't going to have children until we had both finished our education and were ready as parents, emotionally, financially. And we were married for 10 years when we decided to have our own first, if we could, because I didn't know if I was going to be able to have my own children. And so we had our son Eric in 2003, and then at 3 years we felt that was a good age to start thinking about adopting. and we were matched with we had decided on 2, and then we were going to have one more of our own. So we had our own, we were going to adopt 2, and then have one more of our own, so we'd have 4 kids, because we both come from large families. And we got matched early on with a toddler set, a sibling set, toddlers. And I just felt that, there was a lot of people that can't have their own children, and I knew they would be matched almost immediately if we passed up on them. And I had worked in the field of child welfare for, I think, about 8 years at that point. And I knew that the older children were harder to find homes for. And so we passed up the toddler set, and we passed up a set of 2 boys. They were just really far, like I think they were like in Riverside, and just being able to visit consistently was going to be hard. When you're matched, you start visiting, and we lived on the West LA, so by the time it was just going to almost be impossible to really visit. Yeah. And then our social worker from the adoption agency sent us a picture of these 3 a sibling set of 3, Andrew, Marco, and Brenda. And Andrew was in the middle. And all I saw was my son Eric's face in that face.
Really?
And I was like, oh, I couldn't see nothing but his face.
Wow.
There was just a huge resemblance. And I asked my family, like, yeah, you're right. It's like, wow, it's so weird. And we had no desire for 3. We had not wanted 3. And she's like, I know you guys don't want 3, but I thought I'd send you these kids. And, they're kind of like what you want, because you've said you want older, harder to place. And they don't have any of the issues I'll be real honest. There was a whole list of things you say you don't want, like history of mental illness, history of drug use. I checked those off. My heart's not that big. People say, oh, your heart's so big. I'm like, well, I checked off all those things I didn't want. And she said, they've had a steady placement. It's just, they just need a home. And we ended up going with that. Mm-hmm.
So you take in Andrew, Brenda, and Marco, and then, so you guys went through a tragedy, and and I know this is probably still very difficult, so I want to be real sensitive, but you went through something that it's like a nightmare for every parent, to lose a child. And so you lost Andrew. So I wanted to give you a minute just to kind of reflect. Tell us a little bit about who he was and his kind of special place in your heart. And then I want to get to this work and how this has been born out of tragedy in a sense.
Yeah.
But talk about Andrew for just a minute.
So Andrew, so he was the youngest of the 3. So it was Andrew, Marco and Andrew are only a year apart. They're both born in July. They're 2 years, a year and 2 days apart.
Wow.
And then Brenda is older. They actually were 3 of 5. They had 2 older siblings still in foster care, Orange County. But Andrew, when we decided that we wanted to move forward with adopting them and having them come into our home, join our home through adoption, Andrew had just turned 6. So when we met him, he was 5, and then when they finally moved in, he had just turned 6. And Andrew, just a very, very special kid, very special. All of my kids, but particularly the ones that we adopted, they all have this very gentle, like noble soul, all of them. But Andrew's was like just so apparent, like from day one. He was just, at 6, he was like the most considerate little kid ever.
Wow.
He had unfortunately he had a lot of he had like a developmental disabilities, like language, speech. He were in the foster home where he had been. They had nicknamed him, it was so sad, they had nicknamed him Mudo, which means mute in Spanish, Mudo, Mudo. He could speak, but he would like stutter in a way. It was hard for him to express himself. It was expressive language disorder. I don't know. They were diagnosed with everything under the sun,
sure, yeah.
everything under the sun, and then some afterwards. So anyhow, but so he was, and he was also a very anxious kid, very anxious. But he was, I don't know if you know much about like behavioral stuff, but there's some kids that are externalizers in their behaviors,
Right.
and some that are internalizers.
Right.
Well, we're all like that, right? So even
Some
as we
of
grow
it,
into an
yeah,
adulthood, right?
yeah.
So Marco and Brenda were the externalizers.
Okay.
They're the ones we had to just, from day one, rages, tantrums, oppositional, defiant, conduct disorder, everything that probably could have been diagnosed with, they got diagnosed with. And Andrew was all internal anxiety. With Andrew, we, when this started happening with him, we had already had issues. Marco from day one was like our challenge. He was our challenge from day one, week one. I think we had a few days honeymoon. We had a few days of honeymoon. And we didn't realize how traumatized the kids were until we started seeing Andrew's stuff. And it all started with projectile vomiting. And you know, it's funny because I had been I'd been in the field for a while at that point.
Wow.
And I would have never thought projectile vomiting was actually real. Like it just, people have this, the anxiety, it's instantaneous, like micro milliseconds. The anxiety just, and it's out.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, I never experienced it, had never had a child like in my caseload that had that. I don't have a history of anxiety like in my family for me to have been able to say, you know,
Right.
okay, this happens. And he also, he just struggled. I mean, and there was one night where he actually had hallucinations.
Really?
It was, and we were sitting there going, this isn't real. These kids didn't have the placement that you all sort of, like the child welfare system painted for us.
Right. See,
And that dove us into having, which I think it was a really good thing at that point, full-on psychological testing for all of the kids. And yeah, we learned a lot about them and their history because we talked to the birth parent, the birth dad, and learned everything. So everything I had checked off that I didn't want was all there.
Right.
Plus.
Isn't that
Yeah, but he was a beautiful soul.
Yeah,
Beautiful soul.
sounds
And
like
that carried on. You know, eventually it's funny because going back to like what happened, I don't know, I just felt he had overcome his anxiety. But I think that he was so good at masking it.
Right.
And I do think that there were times where it wasn't a part of his, he overcame it for the most part. He was a very outgoing kid, had lots of friends. It's hard to know. So it's hard to know, and going to what happened, it's funny that you say, and I know you do it out of respect, and I appreciate that. Losing a child, that definitely is a tragedy in and of itself. And it was so funny because after Andrew took his life, I couldn't say he passed. That didn't even make sense to me. He didn't pass. No, he took his life. And I think the only reason I can even sit here and talk about it is because he was adopted. I mean, and it's funny because we loved Andrew. Like Andrew, because he was the youngest and because he has such a beautiful soul, he was the one that was least affected in terms of his attachment. So my older two, and they were diagnosed. I don't think Andrew was. Maybe he was. I don't know. But he was able to. And I think it was because of his age and his closeness to our son Eric. So he was able to build attachment with us, and us with him. I cannot say the same is true for our daughter Brenda and our son Marco. And they were diagnosed with attachment disorder very early on. And not surprising, right? They were in foster care for 5 years before they came into our home and had multiple placements. multiple. I think they had like 5 in 1 year.
Wow.
So it was pretty. I mean, it's not surprising that they can't form a healthy attachment, right?
Right.
But Andrew did, and so it's interesting because, like, we really felt like. I cannot tell you that I love Marco and Brenda in the same way that I love my son Eric. It's different. And I know people will say, well, no, yeah, you can. Well, for me, and I'm just going to be honest. And I know part of their trauma had to do with that inability for us to really form genuine attachments. But with Andrew, we did. And so when he took his life on May 15th, 2018, I almost feel like it's a tragedy upon a tragedy.
Right.
I always say, I don't know if I could have bounced back so quickly or have been able to talk about it. We started a remembrance for him 2 months after. If it had been my son Eric, my biological son, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I feel it's so painful. There's the stigma and the shame.
Right.
And the sense of responsibility as a parent,
Right.
all of that is mixed in there.
You've been through. And you decided at the memorial, you and your husband Oscar decided at the memorial that you were going to do whatever we had to do so that his life and death were not in vain. And you want to help other young people who are hurting and suffering in silence. And that's the purpose of the Vita Center. So we only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to say, I mean, this Vita Center, if you want to get involved, we'd encourage you to. You're taking young people ages 16 to 20 who are suffering in silence like Andrew. Maybe you don't see anything, but there's stuff going on inside. You're trying to help reach them. Is
Right.
that right?
Yeah, they're the kids that, like kids like Andrew, you know, they don't come, well, he did come from a disadvantaged background, but, you know, a lot of kids, like when I was 12 and I came from, you know, public housing, I was obviously kind of at risk or disadvantaged. So I was identified. And I think there's a lot of young men, especially, like him. He's not failing school. He's not a delinquent. He's not, you know, he's just, and so I think those kids, a lot of those kids kind of just they fall between the cracks. Like no one's really paying attention to them.
Right.
And then they're not the super smart kids that are college bound and, you know, got programs for them. There's just, I think there's a whole, especially young boys.
Yeah.
Really.
They're trying their best to put up the front of strength and I'm okay, but when you find out what's going on, then it's not okay. So that is a noble mission.
Yeah, thank you.
So we definitely wish you well with that. It's the Vita Center.
It's Vita Center.
And is there a website yet, or is that?
Yes,
what
vitacenter.org.
Vita Center, so VIDA Center.org. Maria Hernandez, thank you for what you're doing, and
you.
God bless you guys.
Thank you.
And,
this is great.
yeah, we look forward to, I know it's the Turner Foundation, we look forward to partnering with you however we can to see you reach more of these kids, because today, I mean, even like this pandemic, suicide rates are up 90%. I mean, it's tragic what's happening today. I mean, right? So the timing of this work is so important. So bless you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We'll see you next time.